Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this live stream. I'm delighted to be back again with Uthman. How you doing, Uthman bhai?
Alhamdulillah, assalamu alaikum to you, Zabur.
Wa alaikum salam. It's always nice having you back. We have this sort of chat about different sort of topics, but I was so happy to see your book, Shadow of Strangers. And in fact, the day I saw the physical copy was the same day I think Hamza was here. You were here, Imran was here, Hijab was here. There's a whole bunch of us. And
Yeah.
sadly, that day there was no copies for me, but I'll get a copy soon,
No,
inshallah.
no, no, I've ordered some more, so you'll get yours, inshallah, for sure. For sure.
Brilliant, brilliant. So, this is a new book you've written with Quillspire. The first thing I want to ask you before we get into the book and what led to it is Muslims are not really known, and Muslim scholars and thinkers are not really known to meander off into the area of fictional books, right? This seems um a bit of a dark horse, a bit of a strange area to get into, but I could straight away intuitively I could just see the need of this. So what what would you say to someone that would say, well, we need books on the reality of things and books on akida and books on fiqh and books on these types of things? What would you do, writing a fictional novel?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد كل ما ذكر ذاكرون اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد كل ما غفل ذكر الغافلون. I want to thank you again, Sabur, for having me, inshallah, on your show. And I think it's may Allah barakah in the short time we have, inshallah, together. We should remember, of course, that we're all navigating different spaces and places in life. And so too young people. And as we get older, we forget, in fact, the needs of young people. And one of the beautiful things about the prophetic tradition is that, if you look at the hadith about when the Prophet went to Anas ibn Malik's brother, Abu Umair, his nickname was, and he had a sparrow, and the sparrow dies. And the Prophet says to him, Ya Abu Umair, ma fa'lun nughair, what has happened to your sparrow? And it shows that the ulama, they say that because the Prophet is engaging with what Abu Umair was interested in, meaning the most important thing for him in his life right at that moment would have been his pet toy thing, his sparrow thing. And we should not forget, therefore, that different people relevant to the age groups have different interests and different spaces they transition through. So our young people, of course, are reading things, have to read things for school and this and that. And there are always reasons why people write things. Like if you think about John Steinbeck writing of Mice and Men, it was about dealing with the fact that people have struggles in society and they're branch workers and this and that. J.B. Priestley is authoring Unexpected Calls, social inequality, struggles. There's always, therefore, a reason for Macbeth, of course, was written for James I because of assassination attempts and regicide, treason, and stuff. And sometimes books have good messages behind them, depending on, of course, the teacher who's teaching those texts, for example. But then again, you also find negative things in many books, things that we would disagree with as Muslims, the things that involve things like magic and haram things. I think, therefore, there's a need for having our children and the young people, of course, reading things that are more in line with our tradition, that disseminate very strong Islamic ideals. We have a tradition in Islam about people who are qusas, or storytellers, and people would tell stories. But the idea behind the stories would that you would ensure that the stories contain those strong ideals of Quran, of the importance of Sunnah, or of a value in life, purpose in life, and I think that there's a need for us to be doing that.
Absolutely. And I really love the way that you started that, Uthman, by recalling, we are in a different stage of our lives, but many young people are in a totally different one.
Yeah.
I remember when we were young, Harry Potter was the thing. It's like everybody was into it. I wasn't into it, my brother was. And if we look at the popularity of that book, it's quite unprecedented that, this wasn't a time in which there was no TV. We still had internet. We limited internet, but there was TV. There's Cartoon Network 24/7. Yet it was a hit. It was a huge hit, and people just think of the films, but actually it was the book. And likewise, Dune, right? So
Yeah.
books are still quite popular. And you also referred to the fact that, books are written in context of a cultural or social situation that people find themselves in. And I just remembered when you were speaking how, Charles Dickens was writing at a time that, you had this disparity between the wealthy people and the people who were of a working class nature. And this was at the time of the height of the British Empire. And many people from the upper elements of society did not have access to the world of Charles Dickens and the
Yeah.
Oliver Twist and all that great stuff. So, I mean, in many ways, these types of books are a type of social commentary, right? With
Yeah.
those moral lessons.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's good you mentioned Charles Dickens, because if you look at Christmas Carol, for example, which is of course all schools study it, have to teach it, and there is of course the importance of charity, of giving at a time of like merriment in that occasion, in that context, in that time. And I think that because Charles Dickens, he puts himself almost in the book, and it's quite typical for authors to put themselves in the book. He, of course, has tragedy concerning his parents, his father, and he lived next to a workhouse. So he saw firsthand what the orphans would go through in the treadmill and the punishments, and therefore he encapsulates that kind of attention in his book to make people alert to the need to give charity and be not miserly like Scrooge, but to be charitable and stuff. So
Yeah, absolutely. And just before we begin, what I do want to do is to show the viewers where they can go and get this book. So I'll put a link in the comment section, and here is the actual page. Shadows of Strangers. You've got a really nice cover here as well. It's really
yeah.
inviting, and it's a very reasonable price as well. So whoever wants to, please go to the website Quillspire and order a book, and it should be with you within a couple of days.
Mm,
So let's get into what inspired you to write about this episode of history, um, this time which is quite fascinating, with Andalusia and its history. We could have chosen, a whole completely different era, but what was it about this time period that really intrigued you?
mm. Well, this is the book to begin with, Shadows of Strangers, so you can see it firsthand. Uh, there is, in fact, quite a, I think, remarkable story behind the book. Sometimes those who are aware of that read the book with a particular kind of mindset because they're aware of the fact that there's a story behind the book and its context. And it was, in fact, about 8-9 years ago, I went on my first trip to Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain. So if you think about Al-Andalus, of course, was a formidable Islamic empire, like a stretch from all of Spain, Portugal, all those major states, Cordoba, Seville, Granada, Asija, Toledo, were all Muslim states. And Muslims had, of course, a very big empire civilization. You had the first point of convivencia, of the coexistence of Muslims, Jews and Christians working together and living together under the good nature of the Sharia. And then, of course, the Christians in time took power. So Muslims became divided and became weakened, and you had these autonomous Muluk al-Tawa'if, like small party kingdoms. And as they became divided, the Christians of the north became strong in Leon and Castile, Navarre, Aragon, and even further north, like Galicia, the mountains of Asturias, and they received funding from the papacy in France. And so Muslims became weak and divided, and Christians became strong, and they took power in Al-Andalus. And then you had, of course, the events of 1492 and the Spanish Inquisition. So what had happened is that I knew a bit about it because the first Crusades, in fact, were crusades towards Spain, not towards Jerusalem. In fact, in the words of Ali ibn Tara Sulami in his book Tabul Jihad, he says that the Crusader interest is not just Jerusalem, it's Spain, Sicily, and then Jerusalem. So it's kind of a sequence of conquest. So we knew therefore that the first indulgences, the first privileges were given to Spaniards, who went to take territory from Muslims in Spain. The same kind of Pope, even Pope Urban II had a papal bull for Spaniard Christians towards Spain, and popes before him, like Gregory VII and Alexander III, for example, had the same thing. But what really made this, I think, a big experience for myself is that when we went to Spain, we went with Tazkiyah tours and take these amazing trips to Spain, and we went from here to Malaga, Malaga to Cordoba, Cordoba to Seville, Seville to Granada, Granada to Alberus Mountains. We stayed there for a day in each place. And it was during our trip to Cordoba, which was the capital city of Spain. It was in fact not the first. The first was Seville, but it changed soon enough to Cordoba. And people know a bit about Cordoba because of Masjid Cordoba, the great Masjid of Cordoba. And there's now a lot of interest in revisiting the Islamic history. A very important museum at the end of the bridge over the Guadalquivir. Even Guadalquivir is after Wadi al-Kabir, the big river. And when we were there, we were hosted by a family of people. And the story was that a man became Muslim in the 1960s, and he exchanged his beach house for this farmland in Cordoba with the intention that whoever becomes Muslim would have a safe place to stay. So we had that motivation and drive to secure a place for future converts to Islam. We get there. Sorry. We get there. And it's really beautiful. So a farmhouse, and all these ethnicities of all reverts to Islam, different races, traditions, and all intermarrying. And they're cooking food for us. And so the whole group, they made lunch for all of us. And so we had lunch. After lunch, the man's passed away, but his son gave a talk to the whole group, and he said that, this was my father's wish that you would come here and you would see what's happening and the growth of Islam, and we would have a safe place for reverts to stay. And then he said that, we are from the people of the Moriscos. And I thought, what's happening here? And he said that, like our forefathers had to hide and practice their faith in secrecy. And they hid books, and they hid their faith, and they were outwardly, that people saw them to be Christians, but they inwardly were Muslims. And I thought, and I was really like taken aback. I thought, this is such a powerful story. Why do we know more about these situations happening here? And so, subhanallah, on the plane back from Malaga, I authored the first parts of the book are from the journey back on the plane. The first part, the first words. In fact, the first chapter, Book of Remembrance, are all written on the plane from Malaga back to I think it was Luton. Today, a brother who went on that trip showed me his son, small son, holding up the book, picture of it. I said, brother, we were on the same journey. And he goes, I remember everything. Because when I wrote the first book, I showed it to him. I said, brother, read this because I want to make this into a book one day, inshallah. And then he read it. And so, subhanAllah. And then what happened is that when I first wrote the first part, of course, my bigger interest is in nonfiction, and my other books are nonfiction books. But this was always being like on the side project. It was like a paragraph a month, a short kind of a writing thing here and there. And I just didn't have the time or the situation to complete the book in one go. And what happened is that in 2023, I was contacted by Quill Spy Publishers, and they sent me a random message, subhanAllah, saying, any help you need, we can help you. And so I thought, well, I've got this manuscript that's 12,000 words, or what it says there. It's like a slow process, but it's something that I think if someone's interested in it, we can make it work. I sent to them, and they loved the idea, loved the genre, loved the fact this is a really wonderful thing we have for our children. And then from that point onwards, from October 23 to about June, July 24, I began to write a lot to get it finished, inshallah, in time. And then, of course, as you can see, it's a beautiful book with beautiful cover and beautiful color pictures inside it as well. But many things go into writing a story. You have to make it, of course, it's different in fact to non-fiction, because with fiction you have to really make it interesting for that specific target audience. I aimed at young adults and teenagers. I think they would really appreciate the book, but I guess for all people as well. But you want to have those cliffhangers and turning points and this and that. And so I think that if you can have that, then you can make the book engaging. So it's kind of historical fiction. It's based on real events happened in that time, based on a Muslim family, the Gomez family, Fernandez, his wife Maria, their two kids, Nicholas, Elvira, family friend Catalina, and they're like these secret cryptic Muslims in that time. And it's about the power of sabr, of patience, of endurance, about tawakkul in Allah, trust in Allah, about courage, bravery, resistance, and then of course about using because remember, of course, in real life, the Moriscos had their own language, which they made up, secret al-Cambiado, a secret language. And so it's about how to keep secrets, developing secrets, how to communicate in secret. And of course, the Moriscos would hide books, like they would make false walls and hide book behind wall cavities and bury them under floorboards. And the same kind of things exist in the book. The book is about survival, about protecting a legacy, heritage of Muslims, and about realizing that the most important thing, irrespective of situation people are in, is about their Iman. If they uphold their Iman, this is the kind of the fathers and the mothers teaching towards the children, then they're winners. Wherever you look, however you look, if you die with that state of Iman, then you're always successful. So the book therefore hits home that message. I think it's but it's kind of, I've left on a deliberate cliffhanger, so I'm writing a sequel to the book now, inshallah.
MashaAllah, it's a really nice introduction. And, the chapters have some really interesting titles as well. So you have the Book of Remembrance, Gentle Drops of Rain, and, What's the Notebook? You'll Need It Later. It's quite, I could tell that you've put a lot of thought into this. So with any good film, book, article, there are certain feelings you want to evoke, right? There's certain, like someone reads it and they walk away feeling a certain way. Because this is catered towards young people, what did you want them to walk away after reading this?
I wanted them really to see and appreciate the humanness involved in the experience. That we're not talking about superheroes or about people who are like, prophets, but they're people who are like humans like us.
Yeah.
And they, like us, have to navigate those spaces of treachery, difficulty, trying to find the importance of Islam in those spaces and places. Yeah, sometimes it could be, for example, surveillance. It could be a suspicious neighbor that's kind of like listening too much, and they have to be cautious about what to do with that surveillance, suspicious neighbor. Other times it could be a bully in a monastery, in a school, for example, and who's making fun of the Muslims and the Moors, and how would you navigate that space? So I wanted people to read it and feel proud of being Muslim, number one, to feel emboldened, knowing, of course, that that's a very profound legacy of people who hold on to their faith in the most grueling situation that they could have in that context, but they stuck to their faith. I wanted people to see that, we're all human. There are characters in the book. One of them can't walk too well. One of them has a speech impediment, stutters, for example. So I wanted to put a realistic situation around the characters to make them human. So they're all struggling in difficult things, but the most important thing for them is Islam. So I wanted, therefore, people to know about, like the last chapter of the book, you might know, is called "A Boy's Courage." So courage and the resistance is very key to the novel. It's a novella. It's a short novel. And and love, of course, of families, love and
Hmm.
protection, and kind of like looking after each other. These are important points I think I wanted people to take from the book, inshallah.
Hmm. It's so fascinating that, sometimes as a writer, your own experiences, you'll have to rely on them and then try and imagine what a
Yeah, it's
situation would
true.
have been like. So being a minority,
It's true. It makes, in fact, writing a bit easier because you can put yourself in that character situation. So the same thing that you would feel, they feel. Same thing that you experience, they experience. So I think in some ways it makes writing a bit easier
Mhm.
because that character becomes you in some ways, you know. Sometimes they say, like, authors, they simply observe people, like they sit in a cafe and they simply observe people in the cafe, and those characters like become the characters in the book, and they give them identities and names, and they look at their movements and kind of give them categorization. So I think that we should be doing a lot more of this. I think that when I spoke to Sheikh Haytham al-Haddadi, says that this is really a need for us to be doing, because there is otherwise what's going to happen is that, like you mentioned, there could be, and I'm not saying that all books are bad, because some books in fact have very good moral message lessons behind them, and we can benefit from them, but it should be for us as Muslims an Islamic edge to those books. There should be Islamic kind of current and Islamic messages behind the books that we read, and the ones that are still reading, because now of course you have books that are online. You have books on Audible, and by the way, the book will be available also on a new platform called Soti, which is a Muslim version of Audible. And so this already it's been done fully by a Muslim narrator who's narrating the book. Alhamdulillah. So I think that people who are less inclined to read will have the chance to listen to the book being recited, and it's really wonderful. So I've heard some of it already, and it's really wonderful done. Alhamdulillah.
Excellent. And one of the powerful things about written material as opposed to visual is you have to make the effort to imagine that situation.
Yeah.
And it's more heavily ingrained in your brain than it would be if you just saw it on the screen. I remember many years ago, many years ago, when I was in school, there was a teacher who was mentioning some book and, asked the students, "Oh, have you read this book?" And, a few of them raised their hands or whatever. I didn't. And the teacher said, "Well, have you seen the film?" And the students obviously had seen the film. And the teacher asked, "Well, did you imagine it that way that you saw it in the film, or was it different?" And it's like a consensus. Nobody imagined the film to be like the book, because they have their own imaginations when they're thinking of, you mentioned a character who is in the monastery and they are bullying, say, the Muslim child. A Muslim reading the book would remember maybe a bully in their school, and they would remember certain things, and it become more real for them, and this kind of thing. So there is a power in storytelling, and we obviously know the power of storytelling because it's mentioned in the Quran. The Quran is full of stories, right? So it's so important for young people to have these type of materials so that they can flourish. Another thing I wanted to ask you was your experiences as a Muslim living in a largely non-Muslim country. I'm sure you've done some jobs where you are the only Muslim there. We all have done that, praying in the cupboard or putting your foot in the sink and getting caught. Like, we've all had those awkward situations, right? How did that experience of living as a Muslim minority shape the way that you tried to envision how these people must have been in an era that's so distant from ours?
It's a very good question, Mel or Roger, but it's a very good question, because I think there are some parallels that we can appreciate, uh, even though times are different. There are some times where you might feel more of the struggle involved in these kind of things than other times. I think there was a time when going through Prevent and so-called British values, all that kind of stuff, made life difficult. I was in fact in UCL University just day before yesterday, and we were speaking about that, the fact that sometimes there was a banning on speakers and this and that, and it was just difficult for them to maneuver and to function effectively. um, I think that when our kids read these stories of people who have to, for example, there is a there is a teaching about how they would make adhkara, for example, like in the morning and evening,
Mhm.
how they would count on their fingers, for example, but do it discreetly so that no one knows that this is happening, for example. Small acts of resistance. Well, for example, doing things beginning on the right hand side, but so that no one else knows that you're beginning on the right hand side, for example, but you're following the sunnah and doing that. Or small things like, for example, praying, but praying in the night when people can't see you praying because you can't be seen praying. Um, Sometimes, for example, there is a and I'm not saying this is a rule, but I'm saying that this is like something you might appreciate in hindsight, that going through a struggle to do something can have more of a value to it, rather than doing something always easy. And I give my example to my daughter, for example, who prays in school, but she goes to a non-Muslim school because we couldn't get a place in the Muslim school, and she goes there, but the prayer room is dead, alhamdulillah. So she has to, of course, pray in the prayer room and pray before she goes to school, and prays Fajr, and then prays during in school. And of course sometimes it's difficult because she misses her lunch break and this and that. And I said, look, I said, your struggle is what will make you, whatever you go through today, makes you tomorrow. You have to sometimes break something to make something. If you learn the practice of doing things in difficult moments, even if it means, like, for example, making wudu with cold water, you'll appreciate the value of making wudu, because that sticks with you, it forms your identity in many ways. And it's like the example in the Quran when you have the wife of Fir'aun, Asiya, in Surah Tahrim, and she became Muslim in the most horrendous situation, but living in the house of the tyrant who claimed to be like unto Allah. And then you have the verse before about the two wives of Nuh and Lut, who both disbelieved in Allah, and they're living in the best situation in the homes of prophets. And so therefore the place doesn't always secure you. What's really most powerful is where your heart is at. That secures you. So your heart could be in a wrong place, in a good place, and your heart could be in the right place, in a bad place. So you want to make sure that your heart is in the right place, because then you can survive and function better, even if you're in the wrong place at the same time. I think that in this situation, in the story of the Shadows of Strangers, you find Muslims, and it's not to say that they're a monolithic group. They're not all the same, by the way, but this family, of course, holds on very strong to their faith or Iman, and they believe in the power of preservation, or preserving that legacy, to ensure that the children do the same. And therefore, they see their children as then giving birth to other children who would have to carry on that kind of legacy. And whatever they undergo difficulty in their life would make a lot of meaningful sense for them in shaping the character to preserve them for what comes after them later on in life. And I think that that's something that we can all take from. I think that something like you mentioned, for example, we've all, like, sometimes have to pray, and you're praying inside in a clothes shop and behind the curtains, but you have to pray Salah and these things. I remember I had to pray. This is like going back a few years ago. I was at a train station with my daughter, and she was only like 7, 8, or 8 years old maybe, and it was like Asr time, and the train's going to come. But the thing is, I had to pray, so because you can't combine Asr with Maghrib, or you're going to get stuck. So I had to pray, and I said to Mariam, Mariam, I have to pray Salah. And she's saying, no, because you're going to see you, everyone's going to see you. And I said, Mariam, but the same one I'm praying to controls all their hearts. All their hearts are controlled by him. So then I just prayed Salah, and then she's trying to cover me, like she's trying to like get in the way so people can't see me. And then I prayed and nothing happened. And subhanAllah, I just said to her that, I prayed to him who controls all their hearts, as a reminder that we pray wherever we have to, whenever we have to. And that's the most important thing in life. And I think that the fact that in the book they have similar situations where they have to preserve their faith in very arduous circumstances, situations, is a reflection of that, but at a much heightened level.
Mm. It's a really beautiful story with your daughter, mashallah, because one of the things that we are programmed to believe from the time that we're kids is to make things comfortable, right? Just try and make everything easy. We do that in our own lives, we do that in our children's lives, but not that we deliberately seek hardship, but hardship is what develops character.
Yeah.
If you look at the billionaires of the world, a lot of these billionaires didn't inherit the wealth. They went through difficulties. You have very powerful people in many different industries, from cinema to mixed martial arts or anything, right? Or even authors, and they've had traumatic stories. They've had difficulties. They've had pain. And when you were speaking, I was reminded of something Andrew Huberman said, and he's a really interesting guy for anybody who's interested in, neuroscience and neuroplasticity and all this stuff. And one of the things that he said is they've discovered that there's a part of your brain that grows when you go through difficulty. You choose something, you're doing something that's difficult, and that part actually is linked to your discipline as well. And he mentioned that they've studied people that are obese, people that have weight issues, and that part of their brain is actually smaller.
Wow.
So one of the lessons of that, and he was having this discussion with David Goggins. One of the things that they were speaking about is, well, you need to choose things that you don't like to do and do them to,
Yeah.
to actually keep that part of your brain active. And if you
Wow.
think about, this example, I remember the example that, we've all played video games, right? Or some of us are not so interested in them as they used to be. But if you were given a video game as a child, you're given a Game Boy or PlayStation, whatever, and you are told, right, here's your character. So you run around in this world, but there's no enemies, there's no barriers, there's no targets, there's nothing to conquer, there's nothing to do. You run around and there's no obstacles, right? Who would enjoy that game? Nobody. Well,
No
why
one.
is life any different? Why is life any different, right? And one of the things also that's interesting related to struggle is you find people that are, self-made millionaires, and they recall the happiest moments in their life when they were struggling to go up, as
So,
opposed to when they reached that zenith. And one of the things that I guess people can take away by reading this book is the same goes for the most precious thing, Iman. You will
yeah.
truly appreciate Iman when
Yeah.
you've struggled for it. And I
Yeah.
remember a few years ago in the IR office when Hamza was giving a very passionate speech to the brothers, and he said, for everything in life, you want to put in struggle, whether it's whatever education, it's this, it's that, you want to put in effort. But when it's Iman, you expect to be given it on a plate.
So,
Do you see? The same thing. We have to go through those things.
it's so true, and I think that Ramadan coming upon us is a reminder of that.
Yeah.
Ramadan is comes from the word Ramadan, which means heat, which means great heat. So it's like there's a burning process in Ramadan because you're purifying yourself, to make avenues for yourself in seeking closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But to do that, of course, you have to let go of some things that are negative in yourself, bad habits, bad traditions, bad vices, and you want to embrace the good around you and good in your life, to make sense of that. So I think that effort, of course, is very key for us as Muslims. That the 5 daily prayers is a reminder of that. That whatever could be happening, that you simply turn off and you turn towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the key thing. And you mentioned beautiful points about the fact that, we have so many scientific things for, like I said the other day, I said there's no real going from an A to a B. It's not that easy because there's so many trillions of things happening that make the A to the B possible. There's so many synaptic connections in the brain and all this stuff in your consciousness, and all these things have to happen in your nerves and your veins and your things to happen to move for the A to B to become possible. Subhanallah. And if you look in the Quran, like if you look in Surah Al-Rum, the middle part, the middle verses, I think we have those وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ verses, and from the signs of Allah. So there's like lots of them, like there's 6 or 7 of them together. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ, and from the signs of Allah. And they end with إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ, indeed in that are signs for those who are يَتَفَكَّرُونَ يَعْقِلُونَ يَسْمَعُونَ, they think deeply, they think, they listen. But the verses begin by saying وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّن تُرَابٍ ثُمَّ إِذَا أَنْتُمْ بَشَرٌ تَنْتَشِرُونَ. From the signs of Allah is that Allah creates you from dust, from like nothingness, from like just clay, from nothingness, and then you become men and you're all walking around places. And so we find these transitions from a place of base origin of nothingness to a place where you think yourself to be so sure of yourself and so certain. But the key thing is that when these verses come to an end, Allah says, فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ. So turn your فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلَّهِ. So turn your face towards Allah, and to the pure deen. And so the whole emphasis is that use whatever you have of those challenges in life and struggles in life, and you find this conjoining of the marriage, and you find different colors of your skin and languages you speak, and all these beautiful, marvelous things. But the whole point is to turn your face towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's really the key thing in the book, that they're going through these experiences, moments, and they have to make sense of their landscape and the demographics and people around them. Are they trustworthy or not? And this and that. And the mother, of course, has to really play a very key role in inculcating these cultures and values in her children. The kids sometimes, because they're kids, they might forget. For example, I don't want to give too much away because I want you to read the book, inshallah. But in doing that, of course, and they leave with this, with a very strong impression that this is a struggle of endurance and patience, and it requires, the strength of Iman to get them through those difficulties.
Yeah. And I'm glad that the common theme in the book seems to be struggle and patience and essentially longevity, because I've been looking into quite a bit of things about productivity, and character building and this type of stuff. I'm just generally interested in that sort of stuff, and I've found that discipline, I guess that falls within patience and steadfastness and grit. I mean, it's all the same. Sabr, Islamically, it's not just it can't just be translated as patience. We'd also put steadfastness in there. Without that, all the rest of your qualities fall apart. And I remember a video in which Mike Tyson was saying, if you don't have discipline, all the rest is meaningless.
Yeah, for sure.
It's the one thing that's a platform from which your other talents can make sense. I mean, we sometimes have a situation, even in our own lives, we'll know of people that aren't that academically sharp, but they're patient. Then you get people who are impatient, but they're very sharp and low attention span. But in terms of who does well, it's actually the patient ones. And you find that in many, many different things. Patience is a virtue which is often overlooked, or it's in a very superficial way understood. What exactly does it mean? Another thing I was thinking about, when it comes to this framing of what was happening in Andalusia with the Muslims and how they had to hide their faith and do this type of thing, that's a really interesting way and a helpful way to make us realize how much our lives are different to theirs and the struggles they went through, and how it's much easier for us And it reminds me of that narration of the Prophet ﷺ where we should look at people that, have less than us, then rather than people that have more than us. Because, even when it comes to something like salah, when I think to myself, if Allah had decreed 50 salahs in a day, right, what would we be doing? I mean, if we look at the prayer, if we put in our local mosque, right, Masjid Al Jannah or whatever it is, and then if we were to just imagine there was 50 salahs in the day, and then I showed you Uthman by, you know, here's Fajr, Dhuhr, and okay, but in between we have like 10, 15, 15, and that could have been it. But then 50, 25, it went down. I mean, it could have been that the Prophet ﷺ came to us and said it's just five, right? But it started with 50, and Muslims keep that in their mind. And because they think, oh, I could have been 50, but now we're only doing five, it makes you feel much better about the situation. Likewise, a young Muslim reading about what these ancient Muslims went through, it will make them realize, well, if they have to hide their faith and they're living in this society, then, me living in London or New York or whatever, I have no excuse not to pray on time.
Yeah, for sure. I like it. I think it's a very good point you're making. I mean, sabr, like you mentioned, patience is habs al-nafs. It is to imprison one's soul, oneself. And in that situation of Al-Andalus, in their situation, they had to rely a lot on tayammum to make wudu, because because the sound of water would awaken the rotten hearts of the surveillance teams, and so they were cautious about water splashing. There were so many things that to be cautious of. So one, of course, making tayammum, they would make tayammum sometimes by just touching the hands on the walls and making tayammum like that. But even then, they will be suspected, because if they're walking the streets and it's narrow streets and they're brushing their hands against walls, there's a question, why would you be doing that? Midwives, for example, if a child is born, you would have a Catholic midwife at the birth to ensure no one is going to be calling adhan in the child's ear when a child is born, for example. When a person dies, you would make sure that they would make sure that the undertaker is going to be a Catholic Christian priest, to make sure that the person isn't buried facing towards Mecca, for example. So there's so many restrictions they put in place to ensure that Islam wouldn't survive. Arabic language, for example, a forbidden language completely. And it's ironic because the growth of civilization came from that part of the world where even Westerners like Michael Scott and Petrus Alfonsi, who studied with the Muslims of Toledo and places, they took back the works of these luminaries, and they translated the work of Al-Khawarizmi and others, and Ibn Zuhar, for example, was all done in Arabic and then translated into different languages from the Arabic. But they burned everything. They burned at the Grand Fires of Granada in 1506 and other years, where they burned all the books, and except the books that had like gold illuminations, because they could make money from them. But on the whole, they burned these things. So Muslims therefore had to hide whatever they could, because there wasn't a great surplus of texts still in existence. They had to hide whatever they could, of pages of poems celebrating the Prophet ﷺ, or Quran, or whatever they could get. It was like a valuable treasure, because that's survived, and where you have to safeguard it. And I think that's very profound, because if you think about like the way that we appreciate knowledge, for example, or should appreciate knowledge, or like just anything that you retain, imagine if you have only a page of it, rather than a book of something, but a page of something. Like the kitab, like the chapter is called Kitab, the Book of Remembrance, because it's based upon Al-Qurtubi's book, Kitab al-Azkar, which is what the family have. But they only have some pages of it, but they have to safeguard it. So I won't give too much of it, but that's there. So I think that having that sense of patience is very key. Now, in that situation, because on the whole they're really Maliki in the madhab, because you had the influence of Yahya ibn Yahya al-Laythi, studied with Imam Malik, came back to Spain during Islam's height, and he taught the people the importance of the Maliki madhab, and they all became Maliki. And so this family is Maliki, and so Malikis, of course, pray with their hands down and they look straight, and it made Salah a bit easier for them in a situation. But still, then there was still a rule. So, for example, You had Ahmed bin Boujuma from I think Algeria somewhere, but he gave this fatwa to the Muslims that you have to be like the one who's holding on to hot cold, even though it's difficult, and therefore safeguard your faith and pray in secret and fast in secret and do things. Like sometimes, for example, the surveillance teams, they would deliberately invite the Muslims over, knowing, of course, it's Ramadan. So it's Ramadan, but they would invite them over for like tea or for lunch, and Muslims would be forced to eat, and they would go home and they would vomit. They would vomit whatever they've eaten, or alcohol, and then they would vomit whatever they've drunk. So they had these acts of endurance. Or you had, for example, very strong acts of resistance, like of Maria from Ishbiliya, a very famous name, or Isabel from Ishbiliya, who proclaimed Islam publicly, uh, like in defiance, say, I believe in Allah and I believe in the Prophet Muhammad. And of course, maybe she was martyred because of it, but that's kind of like how they would express themselves. That when things became too hard for them, they would opt for like a very profound, elaborate resistance in the eyes of the enemy. So other people took like different measures, but the whole point is they're all trying to safeguard their faith in different ways. When it comes to praying Salah, when it comes to fasting Ramadan, for example, Ramadan was key because there was something for them to do collectively as a family, but they couldn't always do it like that. It's like, for example, if you read Sevens of Allah by Sylviane Diouf, the one who wrote the book about the Muslims from Senegambia who were to travel to the Americas in the slave trade, and these were Muslims, by the way. 1/3 of all slaves were Muslims, and so he goes through difficulties that they had when they went to the Americas, and as Muslims, some of them like memorize Quran, and now they're in a Catholic in a Christian country, and they're forced to become Christian. They change their names, but then they practice Islam in secret. Like they made secret bonds, and they would teach Quran to their children, and they would pray in secret. It's similar in some ways because it's a kind of hyper surveillance on them. But the most important thing for them was to, in fact, in Sylviane Diouf's book, I remember that when one person was caught, like is interrogated, and he was asked, what's your name? And he kept saying Allah Muhammad. So they saying, but what's your name? Allah Muhammad. So that's all he knew what to say was Allah Muhammad. And so that's like they called him Allah Muhammad after, because that's all he knew what to say. After they say, what's your name? Allah Muhammad. So it's like people really sacrificed for Islam. They really gave their lives for Islam, and I think that we should not forget that we're just on the shoulders of giants. We're just carrying the same kind of torch, but people are far better than us, greater than us, have carried it with such difficulty before us. And I think that now, of course, looking at what's happening in Gaza and Palestine, and you see that active resistance in the Muslims. I was telling my wife today that I think that if you think about the events of the Isra and Miraj and the travel from Mecca to Jerusalem and heavenly ascent, there was a point. I mean, the whole context of it was difficulties in the Prophet's life, like you had the events of Taif before, and you had the Amul Huzn, the year of grief. And in Taif, when he was when the people and the kids were throwing stones at him, and the angel came and said, I would I would crush these two mountains. I would crush the people between the mountains. And the prophetic prayer, Allahumma ilayka ashku dha'fa quwwati, Allah, I complain because of the weakness of my strength, wa qillat hilati wa wana al-nas, and lack of my resources. Then he says, wa in lam takun bika ghadab fala ubali. And if you're not angry with me, then I don't mind what happens to me. And this is really a very powerful paradigm. This is the most crucial paradigm, because this affects everything. And I said, I think Gaza should be seen from this reflective state. وَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ بِكَ غَضَبٌ فَلَا. If you're not angry with me, I don't mind what happens to me. Because that's how they act. It's like you could do whatever you want, but if Allah is happy with me, I don't mind whatever you do with me. And so one person in Gaza was saying, you could throw all your bombs, وَلَكِنْ أَمَلْ بِرَبِّنَا كَبِيرٌ, but our hope in our Lord is bigger than that. And I think that's like we say Allahu Akbar. So reflection of Allah is bigger. Was bigger, of course, for the Muslims who survived in this situation with their Iman. And of course, remember that Granada, I begin the book with a prologue. Well, by the way, the book begins with a prologue, and the prologue is in the present day, now, yeah? It's Granada now. So, of course, you have this, you have a lot of conversions to Islam in Granada now. When I was there last, he said almost every week we have new rebirths to Islam in Granada, in the Granada Masjid, and it's overlooking the Alhambra Palace, by the way, the Granada Masjid. And we went there. The Imam was a Spaniard revert to Islam himself, and a lot of people in the Masjid were all reverts to Islam. And the prologue of the book begins with this point. In fact, if you don't mind, I could read it. If you don't mind, maybe it might be helpful. So,
I love that, and I've actually been there. Mm.
so the the book has a picture of it, you know, and this is, and then he says for us, for example, the first words of the book is, "It's happening now. It has been said that time flies over us, but leaves its shadows behind us. The adhan now calls out from the great mosque of Granada, overlooks the valley of the river Darro, offering a vista of the Alhambra Palace, standing on the lush green hill of Sabika, with the peaks of the Sierra Nevada as a backdrop. Its courtyard is a heavenly kaleidoscope of color, adorned with plants native to the Mediterranean, pine, olive, pomegranate, orange, and lemon. The Imam, a young native Spaniard, is dressed in a jubba overcoat, a convert to Islam. His story is etched into centuries of old fabric, woven and worn, lost and found, hidden and rediscovered. He draws his garment around himself as he utters words in Arabic. As the adhan resonates through the air, birds glitter across the cloudless sky. A warm breeze wafts through the scented atmosphere. It is a moment of profound significance. Fresh water still drops from the worshippers, but dries too soon in the midday heat. Downstairs, a lady waits to take her shahada. Veiled, she clutches prayer beads as a bead of sweat trickles down her cheek. Ah, who could have imagined her again? Who could have imagined that the morisco would find his mosque again? Who could have imagined the morisca returning to her home once more? So it begins, therefore, with this happening now, yeah? Then, of course, it goes back in time to how things were during the Inquisition. So I begin the book by showing, therefore, that now, of course, things are not as they were then, and there is this resurgence of faith, in Spain itself, in Granada, and places like that themselves. In fact, we were in Cordoba when I was there last. They had this very big bridge built in Cordoba called the Farnas Bridge, named after Abbas ibn Farnas, the one who tried to, and it's like it looks like two wings, because he tried to fly, So you find these glimpses of this return to Islam or appreciation of Islam, and the book therefore begins, from that point onwards.
MashaAllah. While you were speaking, just before the prologue, um, I was thinking about the struggles of these people. Obviously, you're using your imagination to think of what they went through. But we can also look at how people are dealing with it today. So, one of the things I remember from Arsalan Hidayat, he's one of the Uyghur activists. He said, "This is our Andalus of our times," right?
Subhanallah, subhanallah.
And I remember when I was with him in Turkey, and this is on my YouTube, Uthman Bhai, I'll send it to you afterwards. There's an interview I did with a Uyghur sister who was imprisoned by the Chinese for a very long time. Sorry, a long time ago, even before the current crackdown. And one of the things that she was telling me is she was in prison and it was very cold. East Turkestan gets very, very cold. And while she was in prison, she had a very thin sort of blanket that they'd given the prisoners. But the guards would force the prisoners to make the hands come out of the blanket. You couldn't put your hands in the blanket.
Okay.
And she said the reason why is because they saw us doing afkar.
Subhanallah, subhanallah.
So she said, then we had to keep our hands outside. And then she laughed. And this is ridiculous because she went through trauma, but she laughed and she said, oh, they don't know we do zikr in our hearts.
Yeah, because the hand is a medium, like we follow the sunnah. It's like in the book
and,
we have. That's very powerful, subhanallah.
and
You know, like,
the
yeah,
funny the funny thing is the sister, she was telling a very serious story.
yeah,
This isn't the concentration camps. This is before the concentration camps. Because
okay,
she left East Turkestan maybe 20 years ago, right?
yeah,
And she was teaching Quran, and that's why she was imprisoned. And she was wearing the hijab. And the thing is that when she went to prison, then she spent some years there, and then she was sent out again. And then she was doing some cleaning, and she's wearing the hijab again outside.
okay.
And some police officers went past, and they said to her something like, "You haven't learned your lesson yet."
Subhanallah.
And she was laughing. I mean, the thing is, obviously that oppression in the early 2000s was way less than what happened later, but it just got me to think. It just got me to think about the mindset of these people. And I remember a absolutely shocking incident where, you know, some of these Uyghurs knew they were going to die, and they were consoling each other before they were going. And one girl, she was actually a teenager, she said, "Why are you crying? I'm going to Allah." So, it's not just, this story is obviously very touching, and inshallah, many people are going to read it and give you feedback. But, we can see the need for this type of visualization in our minds, because we don't know the challenges that others are going through. We don't know the challenges that our children will face. We don't even know. We don't even know that, as we get closer to, we're seeing the signs of the day of judgment. We're seeing so many things happening, the type of fitan that are going to begin, the fitan of religion and persecution of religion is greater than killing. It's such a horrific type of thing. And if we don't build our iman while times are good, how can we rely on that iman when things are, really tough?
Yeah, the Prophet says that ta'arraf ilallah fi raqa ya'rifka fi shidda, that know Allah when things are good for you, and Allah will know you when things are hard for you.
Allah.
So being close with Allah when things are good for you is very key for us. And you're right to mention the points about, well, two things. One, of course, there are so many situations in the world today where people have that, you might say, same level of, even maybe even more level of endurance, like the Uyghurs of China, or in Burma, for example, in Myanmar, and Gaza, of course, Kashmir. Many places in the world today, people are, of course, have to struggle for their faith. I mentioned Gaza because Gaza represents really like this sense of global looking, of course, and seeing the way that people of Gaza would respond to a situation of crises, and it reflects the magnanimity of faith that they're seeing in the resistance, and leading, of course, people to embrace Islam and learn about Islam, because they're seeing the way that they believe that the most important thing for them is maintenance of their faith. And even if they lose everything, they still say, Hasbi Allah wa ni'mal wakeel, and that's a really profound thing, that like the man Khalid Nabahan, who of course was martyred, and his granddaughter was martyred, and he would go around people's tents, and I think one child lost a limb, and he said that his leg is with in heaven already, so why are you stressing for? And it's like a reminder that when people like that, and the people that you're describing, like the sister, for to have an akhirah centric worldview, if you make your worldview akhirah, God, Allah centric, then of course that means that everything in your life is really shaped, influenced, makes sense through that viewpoint. Where every like difficulty you undergo is not limited to this life difficulty, this life itself, but means something much more in the next life. And I think that that's something that non-believers, believers can't appreciate. When Ibn al-Qayyim says, rahimahullah, that masakin ahlu dunya, how poor are the people of the dunya, that kharaju minha, they leave the world without even tasting the most beautiful thing in the world. And he says the most beautiful thing is ma'rifatullah, to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so to think therefore that we do what we do because we don't believe this is the only life that we have. We have an afterlife, akhirah. And whatever a person undergoes in this life means something in the next life. And that kind of gives people a sense of resolve, endurance, courage, patience to persevere in that situation that is in. So I do hope, in fact, people read the book, and it will be, I think, a good story, a good reading, for people, and it will really inspire them to have a great sense of hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to appreciate the way that Muslims in that time had to navigate those treacherous pathways and hold on to their faith in those difficult moments. So I think, of course, I think it's written well, inshallah, and it's has within it those key concepts of Islam that we want our children to learn and appreciate. So I think all parents should really try their best to buy the book, to read the book, and to support the work, inshallah.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a great note to end with, and I'm going to put the link for anybody that wants to download the book. I'm also going to be putting it as a pinned comment. Sheikh, anything else you want to say before we end?
Well, it's always beautiful to see your wonderful, handsome face, Sabor. I pray, inshallah, Allah bless you in goodness, and Allah increase all of us in goodness, and Allah prepare us well for doing well in this month of Sha'ban and the month of Ramadan, and to make these times of increase for all of us. There are, of course, the two key verses in the Quran. One when Allah says Allah will not change a people's condition till they change with themselves, and one when Allah says that ذَلِكَ بِنَ اللَّهَ لَمْ يَكُنْ مُغَيِّرًا نِعْمَةً. Allah will not change a blessing and faiz upon a people until they change within themselves. So if Allah removes a blessing, it's because something is changing us. And if we want Allah to change something in us, we must change something in us. If we want Allah to change something around us, about us, we must change something in us. And that means that, as we, not to take Ramadan as the only time we would do that, we should every single day, but to increase in making tawbah, istighfar, ask Allah for forgiveness, things that we're not doing, do it now, of course, make amends with people. So, for example, one thing about the moriscos Al-Andalus is that they had to stick together because there weren't that many of them, and you wouldn't know who to trust. So, in fact, in the book, you have the secret codes of them to know who's trustworthy, but I won't tell you what that is. You have to read the book to find out. But in this situation, we we don't want to ask Allah for all divine mercy, but we're the least merciful, or ask Allah for kind, but we're the least kind. We should be the most merciful and kind towards one another as well. So, be the best you can to your parents, to your siblings, to your children, to your neighbors, to your friends, to really encapsulate the Islamic beauty of companionship and good character about you. That really is important for us to do that. And so not to think, therefore, Ramadan as a month of just solitary, isolated worship. That, of course, has its time, but also to remember the importance of doing good unto others as well. Use your time well. Time, of course, is of the essence. So Ramadan is just ayyam ma'dudat. Allah in the Quran says this is a limited number of countable days. And so plan your time well and make a preparation for yourself. So may Allah increase all of us in goodness, and it's wonderful being with you, Sabur, and thank you again for your invitation to speak about the book. Jazakallah khair.
Wa iyyak, wa iyyak. And just before we go, Quranly, download it. Ramadan's coming, fantastic app. Uthman Bhai knows Isa well. He knows how important this app is. I'm sure he's using it as well, like everyone else is. And if we don't connect with the Quran in the month of Ramadan, then when else are we going to do it? And one of the things I say, just I want your thoughts on this before we end. I ask people, just read one verse a day. Like, even if it's just the translation, and think about it, because the Quran, it's like, once you get into it, once you are, benefiting from it, then you're just going to be hooked. Start with something small.
It's so true. It's because the Quran speaks to you. It speaks about you. You are in the Quran. If you want to, like Imam Muhammad would say, if you want to learn about yourself, read the Quran, because you will find yourself in the Quran. So man's psychology, man's disposition, man's pursuit in life is all within the Quran. So you'll find yourself modeled based upon a character or situation or something in the Quran, and of course you'll see where you're going wrong in life based upon the Quran. One of the things I really loved about the Quran is that you find these like in English you have the suffix. Suffix, of course, is the end point. The prefix is the beginning of the suffix, of course, the end. And you have some verses, of course, that end in the same way. So you have those verses end by saying لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ, and this is very key for us, not just in terms of Ramadan, but in life itself. That Allah says, perhaps you'd return back to Allah. And so in life, therefore, undergoing like tragedy or triumph, success or failure, is all bound within this لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ. So perhaps they will return back to Allah. So Allah, therefore, is not concerned about making people fall and people failing. Allah wants to bring you back up, and Allah gives us therefore situations in life. Maybe, for example, there's a lacking in a person, and he has a situation in life to remind him of that. Maybe to become more charitable. Maybe like there's one brother came to me, subhanallah, and he was complaining about this. That I said, the Prophet, one came to him and he says, it says in the narration, Yashku qaswat qalbi, he's complaining his heart became hard. And the Prophet says to him, do you want Allah to soften your heart and to fulfill your needs? And he said, yes. So nowadays you might think of attend a course on tazkiyat an-nafs or whatever. He didn't say. The Prophet says to him, then have mercy on the orphan and wipe over his head in sympathy and pity, and feed him from your food, and Allah will soften your heart and fulfill your needs. Like, think about, are we doing enough for the world around us? Orphans and people in need, and widows and people who are dispossessed and this and that. Because maybe the solution isn't that. Maybe I would find myself improving by looking after them. Or it could be, for example, am I praying Qiyam al-Layl? Am I praying the night prayers? The hadith, it says that the first narration that Abdullah ibn Salam says that the first thing I heard the Prophet say when into Medina was Afshu salam wa atimu ta'am wa sallu bil layli wa nasu niyam wa fuq al-ani tadkhulu bi salam kama qala, spread salam and feed people and pray in the night people are asleep and free the prisoners, you'll enter paradise in peace. So encapsulate both things in your character. One, of course, be the most devout, worshipful to Allah by praying like sincerely with devotion, secret times and moments, and of course be the best you can in your character to people around you as well. May Allah bless all of you.
Jazakallah khair. Inshallah, we can be back sometime after
Inshallah.
Ramadan, and we
Inshallah.
need to definitely catch up because we live 5 minutes from each other. It's embarrassing.
It's embarrassing. Allah bless you in abundance.
Ameen. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.